My organization system is not very sexy.
The average American spends 12 hours on digital devices.
In fact, I'd probably be more panicked without my phone than a kidney. At least I have another kidney with me.
30 funny cat pictures on BuzzFeed, which seemed so important.
I am a ridiculous person looking at ridiculous people. I do not want to look at this.
I just go to my Flipboard and I can pull up something that I know is going to take about 20 minutes to read, and it's like, that's my entertainment for that time.
DK, you have taken the second brain red pill.
And it feels so good.
So it's very surreal to be here, you guys. It is surreal. I didn't tell you this. I didn't tell any of you. But I remember following your work maybe a decade ago.
No way.
When I was probably in college, I saw that you could have an idea that you believed in, that was powerful, that had an impact on you, and then you could just decide without anyone, blessing you or giving you some honorary title to just start spreading that message any way you could. That completely blew my mind back when I was 22 years old.
That's one of the best compliments, especially like when you were in college, because that means you were way further ahead in life than Josh and I were.
Tiago, what I remember, I started writing in my early 20s. And I started sending some of that writing off to agents and publishers and periodicals and quarterlies like the Paris Review. And I just kept getting rejection after rejection after rejection. Now, unbeknownst to me, a lot of the writing was really bad at the time, and I didn't know that it wasn't very good. But those rejections, I kept a stack of them over time.
Oh my gosh.
I realized, oh, yeah, you know what? Everyone's telling me no. And Ryan came to me with this idea of starting a blog, which was the Minimalists.com. Back in 2010, we were still both in the corporate world and living this sort of corporate dream, which ended up being a nightmare for both of us personally. And I realized, oh, yeah, I don't have to have a gatekeeper's permission in order to write, in order to communicate with someone else. Yeah. And the very first month, 52 people visited our website. And that was really the start of the story. It was like, oh, wow, 52 people found value in it. Now, a lot of that was just Ryan's mom refreshing the blog over and over.
She was really supportive.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
But what happens if someone gets value from something you're doing, and you've seen this with your last book or with your blog, when someone gets value from something, they tend to share it with their friends and family because they want to share value. Sharing value is like this human instinct. Oh, I enjoyed this. I think you might enjoy this too.
Yeah, I think what it was too was that your topic is something that doesn't fit neatly into, say, one academic field. I mean, you could study it, you could do surveys and research studies, but it is inherently sort of cross-disciplinary. It's multifaceted, it's human. It's so human that it kind of needs someone with a story. Your story, I mean, that's the foundation of everything. And looking back, I'm just realizing this as I'm talking right now. I followed much the same path, I think subconsciously, started with a blog. That's just what you did.
Yes.
You just needed a playground to start creating ideas. My book came out last year. And now, much like you guys, video is the medium, and so we're not quite at Netflix level. We're not quite on TV. I hope to get there one day, but YouTube is kind of our version of that. So yeah, I just wanted to start by thanking you for kind of blazing a trail, honestly.
Well, we've kind of come full circle too, because I joined the Minimalists roughly about a year ago, but I knew about you before I knew about them.
That's right.
So it was your work building a second brain. I am a building a second brain OG. When you first started with that stuff, you soaked me right into your world of personal knowledge management, and you did it in a way that made it accessible, in a way that made it fun to listen to. I've always been a big fan of Tiago, and so it's kind of full circle. Now that I'm with the Minimalists and they influence you, you influence me, and now here we're all together, full circle, enjoying ideas.
So that is a better segue than I could have done, because that is what I want to do now. Is I want to spend this conversation kind of melding our two worlds. See if they fit together. See if there's some overlap, some similarities, or some differences. If there's some contradictions or paradoxes created by the combination of these two things. And the way I describe this is so much of your work it seems like it's focused on the physical world, physical possessions, physical spaces, your home. My work is completely focused on the digital world. So digital note-taking, digital productivity, digital time management. A study came out, I think just last year, that we now spend, I still can't fully believe this, but this is like solid research, that the average American spends at least 12 hours per day on average consuming media on digital devices.
And so the thing I have to think about here, where is the overlap? Where is the Tiago minimalist Venn diagram?
Yes.
We both are addressing clutter in some form or fashion. With the minimalist, it started, as you pointed out, with the stuff. Because here's another staggering stat. The average American household has 300,000 items in it, according to the Los Angeles Times. And we talked about that in our last Netflix film, showing the stuff, but the materialism, the consumerism, the physical consumerism, because there is digital consumerism as well, and there's information consumerism, there's relationship consumerism, there's career consumerism. All of these things create clutter. And what you're talking about is digital clutter in some form or fashion. And what we are both doing is supporting people and healing their relationships in these different areas with these different types of clutter. It starts with the stuff, but that's the initial bite at the apple. By clearing the physical clutter, because our material possessions are just a physical manifestation of what's going on inside us. If you got a lot of clutter in your home, you don't know anyone who has a lot of clutter in their home who's also like really at peace and emotionally calm and free of chaos and super kind and all of these other things, because what's happening is if I have chaos going on inside me, then also it manifests outwardly. If I start dealing with that external clutter, it makes the space. It doesn't fix my life, by the way, but it makes the space for me to start looking inward and saying, oh, you know what? Maybe there's all this other clutter I haven't been dealing with. Mental clutter, emotional clutter, psychological clutter, information clutter, digital device clutter. Am I spending 12 hours a day consuming content on my device? I'm not saying that's inherently immoral or wrong or even bad, but what am I doing it for? Is it getting in the way of what's important to me? Because if it's getting in the way, that's what makes it clutter. Consumerism is just the ideology that consuming will make me complete or happy. Whether that's material goods, it's information, it is digital content, and it does make us feel a little burst of pleasure. And we confuse that pleasure with contentment.
That was, I mean, that's a great way of thinking of it. It's almost like with the digital world, we now have a new environment. There's now a new place for us to project all of our psychoses into, and it's a space that is in a way more alluring and dangerous and kind of tricky because it's infinite. You can, in theory, just keep buying more hard drives and more storage and more cloud space, so you never run into the four walls of that. At least in your house, there will be some physical barrier that you cannot go beyond. Whereas in the digital world, there's not.
It makes me think about growing up, how I always wished there was more cartoons on. There was, it'd be like 9 o'clock at night, all the cartoons shut down, Nick at Night comes on, and it's all these like old black and white shows I don't want to watch. And now it's the opposite, where I'm like, there's too much to keep up with. There's way too much to consume. And
I'm trying to get to the end of the internet.
Yes,
right? If I could just make it to the end of Netflix, and then I have to make it to the end of Disney Plus or whatever, there's more than we can ever consume. And so what do we try to do? I tell you, one thing that I do is I will often turn my podcast at 2x speed, and now I can get through twice as many podcasts. But there's always going to be something else to listen to. There's always going to be something else to consume. There's always going to be another potential friend. And we have this FOMO, right? As opposed to the term that we wrote about in our last book, Love People Use Things, the terms JOMO, joy of missing out. Like actually basking in the subtraction as opposed to adding more on.
When you talk about projects and building a second brain, you talk about what are the things that are relevant to those projects, right? And everything that is not relevant to that, then we've got to figure out what we're going to do with it. We might throw it away, or we might put it in a not now but maybe later kind of category, or whatever it may be. And minimalism, for us, it's not about physical goods. It's about living intentionally. And so for some people, the clutter that holds them back, it's career clutter. For some people, it's belief clutter. It's the story that I'm telling myself clutter. It's relationship clutter. It's calendar clutter. And so for us, the defining question of minimalism, and I quote Joshua here, is how might my life be better with less? Not with less stuff, but how might it be better with less? Meaning, how can I improve my ability to create the results that matter most to me by clearing away the clutter that gets in the way of the information-rich content? And so I think that's that.
Man,
connection.
you guys are coming up with better framings and ways of understanding this than I have. It's amazing. So let's take kind of a right turn here. We've sort of been talking about what minimalism in the digital world might look like. So I'd love for each of you to kind of take us behind the scenes. Actually, when you wake up in the morning or when you start work, how do you even decide where to start, what to look at, what you're going to do that day, what's important, what's not important, but really focused on the digital interfaces that you interact with?
My organization system is not very sexy. I have, although this might be interesting, I have a today list and a someday list. I don't do to-do lists because a to-do list just becomes an anxiety list for me. So here are the things I know I want to get done today, and if I can't get it done today, it doesn't stay on that list. It goes to my someday list.
Yeah.
And that someday list is sort of a repository for things that I might want to work on someday in some hypothetical future. What I really love about the someday list is quite often I will visit it a month later, 2 months later, 6 months later, something I put on there. Either A, I already worked on it and didn't realize it was still on my someday list. It was just so compelling that I did it. Or I go back to it and I'm like, oh, this isn't compelling at all. And so I just delete it. And the thing that felt so urgent in the moment, if we just pause and set it aside for a moment, I've learned that maybe it's not that urgent at all.
I really like that. And just this is how nerdy we want to get on this channel. Are you using an app for that?
I use real simple Apple Notes. It's on my phone and on my
I'm telling
computer.
you, behind every great leader is Apple Notes.
I'll tell you that our first, one of our books, our first book, Minimalism, and the novel that I wrote in my 20s were both written on a BlackBerry. Not the complete thing, but the first drafts of many of the chapters were written just on a BlackBerry. I teach a writing class called How to Write Better. And it's everything that I wish I could have sat down and talked to my early 20-something-year-old self about with respect to writing, because I used to get so tied up in what pen should I use, what brand notebook should I use, what application should I use. And I think those things can be really helpful unless I'm neurosing about it every single day. And, I know I use Scrivener, but maybe I should use Google Docs for that. And then it misses the whole point. If you are a big fan of Jonathan Franzen and you like his novels, but then you use the same Mont Blanc pen that he used, you're not going to pen the same novel.
For me, it begins with the night before. I like to open up my Google Calendar, and I like to have a Google Doc in the blank Google Doc in the next tab. And I look at my calendar to see where are the places I need to be, what are the things I need to do at what times, how am I already promised out. And so I just put that on my Google Doc. This is where I'm already promised out. And then I ask myself, like, all right, what are those things that are really important to me? Like, I can see what my empty spaces in the day look like. What are the things I want to do? And what's the commitment that I'm making to those things? So, all right, here's a blank space from 1:30 to 3:30. Do I want to take a walk during that time? Do I want to be alone? Am I open to having lunch with a teammate? I'm going to decide now, and if I don't want to decide, I'm going to decide like, all right, I'll be open to that in a moment. And I put that down, but I don't want to be impulsive with my day. I want to be intentional with it. So when I get out of bed, we have a little space in our home. It's a little oratory, and we've just designed it as such. And
Beautiful.
I go into that space before I look at any tweets, before I write anybody, before I look at any text. Because once that happens, you're off to the races.
Yeah.
You can't get your mind back. If I open up that phone and I see a text, something happened or whatever it may be, I'm immediately going to react to that. And I just go into that oratory and I just spend about 5 minutes, just a dedicated act of brief meditation.
For me, man, I sure do love consuming digital entertainment. I could very easily go down that road. So to avoid that, I kind of do very similar to what TK does. When I'm like on my game, I am looking at my calendar before I go to bed. And then I have a note that I will literally plan out my day. Like, what do I want to do at each time? and I'm very forgetful sometimes. So I literally will set alarms for 30 minutes before I need to make a phone call, or 30 minutes before I need to get to that appointment, whatever it is. So I use a lot of the notes, a lot of alarms. I used to use only the calendar, but stuff was dropping out, so I had to add a couple things. And recently I've been adding even the reminders, which I have never found values in the reminders until a buddy of mine who's like a huge Apple fanboy, he was like, "You're not using them right then."
On iOS.
On
right?
iOS, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so everything I'm talking about is on iOS.
Okay.
And when he showed me how to use that more effectively, like that really has been something that I have been utilizing as well.
So do you use the Reminders app as your to-do list?
I use my calendar as my to-do list. I use my reminders as my, hey, you made this commitment 3 days ago. Make sure that you follow through with that commitment.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Yeah, so it's reminders is for commitments.
Okay.
Specifically.
To other people?
Yeah, to other people. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's so funny because look at the simplicity of these tools. I want you, watcher, viewer, just to notice that you can run a global media company with very simple tools that in most cases are free or built into the software we already have.
Yeah.
But now let's go a little bit. So that's sort of like the first concentric circle. That's like your personal, almost minute to minute. But what do you do when you want to? There's a few different directions you could go, like either expand your mind, like consume content on new ideas, new theories, gain new perspectives, or do business planning. Like presumably, if you're going to plan the rollout of a book or a Netflix show or something, you have to have more sophisticated platforms of some kind. Do either of those scenarios necessitate for you something more sort of advanced?
Google Docs.
Yeah, I mean, if you're collaborating on something, I found Google Docs is pretty helpful when we, every week we come in here and record an episode of the Minimalist Podcast, and we have a process document, and we have pre-production notes, and those are shared among everyone on the team. So if we're collaborating on something, I think Google Docs works really well for us. Getting back to the calendar for a second, it's important to have those wide open spaces for me. Ryan and I are complete opposites in this domain. That's why I love what works for him. I'm glad that it works for him, right? And if he were to prescribe that to me, it would be like prescribing anxiety to me. And if I were to prescribe what I do to Ryan, it would give him anxiety because he'd be like, oh, I miss this, I miss this, I miss this. Yeah. And so I think it's been important for me to identify what works well for me. And the thing that works best for me isn't an app, is not a tool. It is one word, and it's the word no. And I've gotten really good over the last decade at saying no, unless it is a hell yes. I am so compelled by this because I don't believe in commitment. I don't want to commit to anything. Commitment is sort of like a decent first step, but you stop being committed to something as soon as it becomes overwhelming or there's something better that take your time or attention away from that commitment, right? Like I commit right now, I'm going to go to the gym every morning at 8 a.m., right? But as soon as that important meeting comes up or that important opportunity is in front of me, oh yeah, I'll just let it go. But if you're devoted to something, it's a true hell yes, right? And then everything else tends to fuel that. I begin, to use your words, consuming content or materials that fuel the thing that I'm working on. If it's a film, then it's something that involves the film. If it's a book, then I'm reading about things that I want to put in the book. It's separate from the actual creating process. I do, when I teach students about writing, one of the things that I teach is research is not writing. It's an important part of the process, but you can research until you're blue in the face, but never have written a single word on the page. That becomes a problem. It's a form of procrastination in a way. And so the only way I do that is I say no to almost everything. If you look at my calendar on an average day, there's 2 things on the calendar, 1 thing on the calendar, some days nothing on the calendar. And if there's nothing on the calendar, it doesn't mean I don't do anything. It means, what am I devoting myself to? What is that one project that's so compelling? It's going to take up all the hours on this calendar anyway.
Yeah.
It's similar with time management. Buying a good time management system or app isn't good time management.
Yeah.
If you use it and it works for you, then that's great time management. But I remember Jess Williams, she used to work with us. She did our social media stuff, and she sent me this system that she used, and she was like, you really might find value in this. And I started to look into it, and I'm like, you know what? Like, I kind of like my janky little calendar note alarm system that I have going on. It works for me. But if that system wasn't working, that's where I might look towards something else. But I do think we rely too much on the tool, or we look at the tool as the answer to us being better time managers. But really, if you own something, if it's compelling enough, you'll figure out how to own your time.
What I love about that is with Jessica in particular, Social Jess we call her. She ran our social media for 8 years. She was one of the least organized people I knew. So much so that we had to sit down and have a talk. Like, hey, there are some things that are slipping through the cracks here. We need this to change. I don't know what's going to work for you. We got to figure it out together. And the system the board she used, Asana, I'm sure you're probably familiar with it. She used that as her organization tool. And I agree. If you just prescribe that to someone, I tried to use it as well. When we started a publishing company back in 2012, and Colin, our business partner, set it up. And I was just like, I don't like this personally.
It was like learning a new language.
Yes.
Yeah.
and so with Jessica, not only did it completely turn her around, she became a paragon of organization and productivity. So much so that whenever we brought a new person on the team, it was like, hey, Mallory, you've got to meet with Jess to see what system she uses. Not so that I can prescribe this to you, but check out her recipe. See if any of these ingredients work for you.
I love using Amazon for researching books and organizing, curating the books that I intend to read someday. I've got some significant constraints about when I can buy books, how many I can buy at one time. So I'm really organized to great detail with about 10 different wish lists. And so when I'm ready to buy a book, I can go look at my wish list, and I can pretty much figure out within about 5 minutes which book I'm going to reward myself with and read next. So
I like that.
I was just recently in a library at a school, a high school that I was speaking at, and there was just some book sticking out, and it was called Hidden Systems. And it's a book about the hidden systems that govern our world, like electricity, plumbing. And it's a book of like systems thinking, but in graphic novel form. And I was itching to buy that right away, but I know that I couldn't. So I took a picture of it with my phone so that later on when I had some time and I wasn't on the go, I was able to look it up on Amazon, put it in the proper wish list folder so that the next time I buy a book, I'm going to be able to track that down pretty easily and purchase it. I also like Amazon because I can not only read reviews, but you can open them up. You can download samples and be able to kind of go through them and preview them. Sometimes you can do that for the Audible app as well. Kindle is really great because there's just a lot of great writing out there that you can't find hard copies for. I recently found this really interesting 30-page paper on academia about the philosophy of voice. And it's so fascinating. You're not going to find that anywhere. You're not going to walk into a Barnes & Noble and see that next to whatever they're selling me for $19.95 because that person is pretty or popular, right? Yeah. And so Kindle has this great feature where you can email it to yourself, so to speak, and it just goes straight to your Kindle in the proper format, and then you can put it in your Kindle library and organize it accordingly. So I like those. I also use YouTube for content consumption so that when I'm on the fence about an author or a book that maybe comes highly recommended, I can usually go to YouTube, find some kind of talk or podcast interview where I can engage the ideas at a superficial level. And if they leave me wanting more, or they make me say, oh, they're compelling, then I can green light the book purchase and be able to dive in a little bit deeper there. I also like to use voice to text, HT Play, because there are some things like the philosophy of voice article. There's like a 30-page research paper I recently got on ritual, and there were parts of it that I wanted to be able to listen to in my hour-and-a-half drive that I knew I was going to have the next day. So I could just go into that text to voice and put it in there, and then I could download it as an MP3 really quickly and just put it to my not my Google Cloud, my iCloud, and then it's right there on my phone. And so when I'm in a car, I can pull that up and I can listen to this article. So Kindle, YouTube, HT Play. I also use the Flipboard. I have like a few magazines created. I don't read a lot of blog posts, but every once in a while I'll come across someone I follow sharing like a long form piece of content. Like the kind of stuff that Vankatesh writes on Ribbon
Yes.
Farm, right? Ribbon Farm, where you're not going to sit down and read anything that Vankatesh writes in 5 minutes, casually. But you might see something that he wrote, and you're like, oh, I know I got to check that out. And so I have a flipboard for that type of stuff, right? I got about like 5 different magazines, and I'll just put it in there. And there are certain moments where, let's say I'm eating lunch at a restaurant by myself and it's just me and my phone. Well, then when I'm in moments like that, or like I'm waiting for the plane to board or something like that, I just go to my Flipboard and I can pull up something that I know is going to take about 20 minutes to read. And it's like, that's my entertainment for that time.
TK, you have taken the second brain red pill. You've gone down the rabbit hole. Wow, I love it. I think so often people use software and they think the software, if they just organize it well enough, if it looks beautiful enough, if it's meticulous enough, that it's going to tell them what they want or what they should want.
Yeah, in fact, the opposite often happens. If we're not intentional about it, then someone will tell us what we want.
Yep.
But it's generally advertisers or marketers vying for our most precious resource. And that resource is our attention. Not just our time, but our attention. It's the reason, I use YouTube regularly. And I think it's great, but I make sure I pay for YouTube Premium because I don't want any advertisers being filtered to me and then making my decisions for me. And even then, the algorithm begins making decisions for me as well. And I have to be hyper conscious of that, realizing that, is this someone else feeding this to me? If so, is it actually what I want, or is it what I think I want? Am I sacrificing what I really want to get what I want right now? This little tasty morsel of something that might be interesting in the moment, but a day from now, a week from now, it's not going to be compelling at all.
Yeah. It's something, I think Tim Ferriss put it this way that really has stuck with me. He said, so every day you log on and you open your device, it's you versus literally thousands of software engineers, scientists, researchers, PhDs at these tech companies using every single psychological bias that they can think of, from shapes and colors and sounds and movement at every level of the neurological stack. Who's going to win? Who's going to win that fight?
And really well-paid demographers, statisticians, whose sole job is not to engage in the arena of ideas. Those bright minds, just a few generations ago, that was what they did. And that's what they encouraged others to do as well. It doesn't mean they're wrong or evil or bad for doing what they do. It means they have an objective. And if it doesn't align with your objective, that becomes a problem. Here's one thing that I do at home. We call it the entryway rule. As soon as I get home, my wife and I, as soon as you walk in the side door where it's our main entrance, there is a shelf right there. And that is the home for our devices. Our phones, my daughter's tablet goes right there in the entryway. Now, I have access to it if the phone rings, or if I need to go send a text message or check a message. I have to get up off the couch or off the chair or out of bed or wherever and head on over to that designated entryway. I can make the phone call. It's almost like having a home phone in a way, right? Back in the days, we had home phones that was tethered to a wall. Mine's sort of tethered to a wall, and that way it doesn't follow me around the house. There was a C-level executive at Google who referred to our smartphone as the 79th organ. And it feels that way. You leave home without it. It's like I left home without a kidney or something. In fact, I'd probably be more panicked without my phone than a kidney. At least I have another kidney with me, right?
The theme that we're talking about is rules and policies. I've noticed this is super important. Everyone has them, at least if you want to stay sane, but often they're so built in that we don't even, I bet none of you have a list of all your digital rules or the digital policies. But can you think of any others?
One quick observation, though, is I would say policies are not the antithesis of play. Policies are part of the essential structure of a game itself. What's the first thing that we do when we have free time? We play. And what's the first part of playing a game? It's like inventing these limitations that we know aren't real, but we treat them as if they have the power to lord over us, because we can't have fun until we have those rules, right? So it's like, I bet I can beat you in a game of basketball if we only shoot past this line and we got to dribble with our left hands, right? That's not a real limitation for us, but that's what makes it fun. And those kinds of policies and rules you don't do them dutifully or religiously, but you do them to preserve the play that makes whatever your interests are, so vital to you. There's a pattern that emerged in my life when I was in college, and I would go to the like Blockbuster video to rent a movie. And I would always spend like an hour or longer just looking for a movie, and sometimes still not find anything. I'm reading the back of the boxes. I'm asking people that I'm meeting there, what would they suggest? And then one day I got the most obvious idea, which is, wait a minute. There are like moments every week where I drive past a billboard or someone tells me about a movie and I go, ooh, I want to see that. But somehow when I go into Blockbuster, I'm overwhelmed by what's on the screens and all the options there. And I forget about the stuff that I know I want to see. And so I just started to keep a little list and I would put it on my fridge. And then whenever I wanted to go see a movie, I take my little list and I'd be like, I'm picking something from this list. And if I saw something cool that was there, well, it gets to go on the list. I've adopted this practice when it comes to content consumption now. There are moments in my day or in my week where it's like, okay, it's YouTube video time. All right, it's reading a blog post time. It's fun time listening to a podcast. And I never listen impulsively. I only listen to things that I have selected at least a day before for moments such as this. And that not only saves me time in the moment, but it also protects me from becoming really smart about mind candy that's not going to be relevant to me in 2 weeks. Because sometimes the things that I save because they seem so interesting now, when I come back 3 days later and I have the chance to read them, I go, oh, that's not even interesting to me now. That was an impulse save. I can go ahead and remove that.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Time shifting, even that, even an hour, even a day, even 2 days, suddenly it's like your psychology gets unhooked from the triggers of that moment.
Yes, the impulse.
The impulse. And you just revisit it. You're like, what was I thinking? I always use the example of, which actually happened, 30 funny cat pictures on BuzzFeed, which seemed so important. I really need to consume this. On a Friday afternoon when I was like really stressed and tired. On Monday, I'm just like, what in the world?
I do it all the time. Like I'll be looking at something on my phone, on the browser, and I'm like, oh, I want to look at this like 30 funny cat pictures. I'm like, oh, I'll just leave the browser open the next time I go to it. I'll see the page pulled up. And 90% of the time I go to the page, I'm like, I do not want to look at this. I do not want to spend time looking at this right now.
Yeah.
That's actually how we came up with one of our rules. So we have something on our website. It's a free download. It's called The Minimalist Rule Book, 16 Rules for Living with Less. But it's a trick because none of them are actually rules. They're boundaries. Yeah. And they're all adjustable boundaries. And they're perspectival as well. So one that applies to me may apply completely differently to you. But one of those rules is the spontaneous combustion rule. And it works really well with physical goods, but it started from a digital app. You want to tell that story?
Oh, yeah. So the spontaneous combustion rule came from a gal who was having trouble getting rid of this sentimental quilt. And she told us the whole story behind it. And I just got this like wild like feeling of like, I'm going to ask her what would happen if that thing spontaneously combusted, because you could tell she was ready to let go. And she was like, I asked her that question, what would you do if it spontaneously combusted? And her shoulders, like she just like loosened up. She was like, oh, I would feel so relieved. I'm like, well, that's a pretty clear sign on what needs to happen with that quilt. But there was another gentleman who he had like 200 bookmarks or something, like, gonna read later.
All these tabs open on his phone right there. We were in New York City, in Brooklyn at a tour stop. Yeah. And he pulls out his phone, he comes up to the mic, and he's like, I've got all of this digital clutter. What should I do?
Yeah, I'm like, dude, I was like, I would challenge you to delete them all right now. And he was like, what? And I'm like, you're not going to read all those. You're not going to read all those. You're just going to grow that list, grow those tabs. If there's anything on there that was so compelling that you do want to read it, you'll probably remember it or be reminded of it somehow. And he's like, I don't know. I'm like, look, I'm not prescribing anything. I'm like, but that might just be the most freeing thing you can do. And like the show kind of went on, and then he came back up. He's like, I did it, and it feels so good.
And that's really the genesis of the spontaneous combustion rule is like, you ask yourself a question, and this applies, I think, really well to physical items. If this item were to spontaneously combust right now, would I replace it? And if so, let's not get rid of it. But if I'd feel a sense of relief if it spontaneously combusted, that's a sign to let it go. And if you have 200 tabs open, or I use Instapaper, it's an app that I use for reading on the go. That way it's sort of uninterrupted, right? But if I go in there and there's like 14 things that I haven't read and they've been on there for months, I just delete them all. They spontaneously combust, and I feel so free when that happens. A few other rules that we use for physical things, but I think apply to the digital realm as well. Something we call the just-in-case rule. And so what happens in our homes, we hold on to a lot of things, like I'll just put that in the drawer, hold on to it just in case, right? I'll keep that just in case. And that's in the attic, but we might as well hold on to it. I haven't used it in 17 years, but we'll keep it just in case, right? My mother died, and she left behind all of this box of stuff. Let's just hold on to it just in case. Well, we hold on to tens of thousands of just-in-case items that we're never going to use, really. And in fact, they're adding a lot of clutter to our lives. The mental clutter, the weight of those things psychologically is so much more than the physical weight of those things. And so the rule Ryan and I came up with is any just-in-case item I'm holding on to, I can give myself permission to let go. And I can replace it for less than $20 in less than 20 minutes from wherever I am. That rule's worked for us for a decade, 100% of the time. Our theory is it works 99% of the time. There's always going to be some exception. But it's given me permission to let go of tens of thousands of just-in-case items that I know I'm not going to hold on to. And yes, I've had to use it a handful of times. That's the weird thing about the rule. At first, it sounds like an incredible rule of privilege. Every time I need to replace a just-in-case item, I'm going to spend $20. I don't want to spend $20 a day. No, I've had to use it between Ryan and I like 5 or 6 times in a decade. What's that, $100?
Yeah.
To get rid of 10,000 things that are in the way? It's a pretty good trade-off.
Actually, I want to know about even the more kind of addictive forms of social media. Not so much, we've talked about ebooks and long form blog posts, and even YouTube these days is kind of like long form. But do any of you allow yourself, and if so, do you have any constraints or boundaries on basically Twitter and TikTok are like the most psychologically addictive?
Yeah. I get caught on the Instagram Reels, and for some reason the TikTok lives are really fascinating too. And what happens is like I'm not even watching it because I'm enjoying it. I'm watching it because people are being so ridiculous. Yeah. And I'm like, look at this ridiculous person. And then I go to the next ridiculous person. And then I'm like, oh wait, I am a ridiculous person looking at ridiculous people. And as soon as I can catch myself in that moment, I will usually like just shut the app down, turn it off. Yeah. iPhone's got that feature where you can manage your screen time with specific apps. So setting up those reminders really help too. Like just kind of setting up that boundary ahead of a time, and then your phone will say, hey, it's that time to get off. Yeah.
I feel depressed after I look down, all of a sudden it's been 45 minutes and I'm drooling on myself and still watching the cat videos on TikTok or whatever. And here's what I've done to fix that in my own life, because I recognize like how addictive it can be. 2 things. One is I'll set a timer, and 2 is I'll usually do it with my wife. Hey, do you want to take 15 minutes and watch some videos together? And then Bex, my wife, and I, we're just laying down on the couch, cracking up, and all of a sudden the timer goes off and we're done. We know we're done. We've set up that boundary.
Yeah. Yep.
Let's now talk about the other extreme. So many people who decide to build a second brain, they're putting that time and effort into it because they have a major endeavor that they're taking on. A lot of people wanting to write books, wanting to start businesses or grow their businesses. Maybe they want to, they're engineers, they're scientists trying to make major discoveries, build buildings, build new technology. How do you, like if you're tackling a major creative project, how do you go about that? How do you organize? Because you're going to have to learn a lot of things. You're going to have to keep track of a lot of material sources, presumably. Is there any particular place or platform that you use to organize a lot of content that you're going to have to use for a project like that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I am always asking myself, how can I subtract, right? And quite often, if I subtract too much, that's deprivation. So I want to be careful. I'm not against any organization system or anything like that. But I have learned in my life that I used to be the goal guy, and I was really proficient at Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Access, especially in our corporate days. And I mean, I was the spreadsheet guy. I was probably I was definitely top 1% of people who could understand Microsoft Excel. And I had everything organized. I said, I can use this in my personal life. Yeah. And so I became the goal guy. I had goals with sub goals, and I'm 60% to this goal, 12% to this goal, 98% to this goal. I would have a list of goals and tabs of goals that were completed, and then I would have formulas that were calculating. And what I realized pretty quickly, as the goal guys, my goals were making me miserable. They were stressing me out. And a friend of ours, Leo Babauta, Zen Habits, really popular blog, he wrote something about living with no goals. And I was almost offended. Like, what a loser.
Yeah.
But also, he's like one of the coolest people I know, one of the happiest people I know, one of the most contented people I know. And he was talking about living with no goals. And I said, oh, that'd be a dramatic change for me. Because I'm the goal guy. And even when we left the corporate world, it was goals for this, goals for that. I said, let me see if I can go a period of time without any goals. And I didn't want to set a predetermined amount of time because that would be a goal, right? It turns out after the first 100 days, though, I wrote a blog post about it, about living 100 days with no goals. And what I've learned, basically, and at first it might sound like semantics, I assure you it's not. It's about traveling in a direction as opposed to having a goal. Let's say, for example, you're here in Los Angeles, and your goal is to make it to New York City, right? And, okay, I can do that. So I know I can map out a path to get to New York City. But let's say I end up in Des Moines on the way, and there's something more compelling in Des Moines. And now all of a sudden I just stay in Des Moines. I failed the goal. But did I fail? No, I succeeded if I found something that was actually more compelling than the goal ended up being. It was important for me to have a direction there, to travel in a direction, but also being willing to let go of whatever that outcome was is incredibly freeing. I think back to our first film, Minimalism, that we made with Matt Diavella, and we didn't have a goal for that. We didn't really have a project management system. Here was our system. We're in Ryan's Toyota Corolla. It's 2014. We're driving from city to city. In the back seat is Matt Diavella on one side and all of his equipment on the other side. And we stop in a city. And is there an interesting person we'd like to interview here? We're in Salt Lake City. Oh, yeah, Courtney Carver. Oh, we're going to be in North Dakota. There's someone we want to interview there. We're going to be in Tucson. There's a minimalist architect in Tucson.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to be in Los Angeles. Let's interview this person. We'll be in Philadelphia. Let's interview them. And then all of a sudden you have all of this stuff. And a lot of it made the cutting room floor. We had over 1,000 hours of footage for that 79-minute film. But it was important to explore all of it. It wasn't about, we didn't even know we were going to make a documentary. It was like, hey, let's try to make something meaningful. I don't know what it's going to be. We didn't really have YouTube back then. Matt wasn't a huge YouTuber. He didn't have a YouTube channel back then. And we just wanted to create something. Use film, video as a medium for creating. When we first started The Minimalist, I was rather married to writing books. And then Ryan was like, well, let's try the whole blog thing. I didn't even know it was called a blog at first. We called it a website, and we wrote essays because we were very erudite. But
Here's an idea. What if we published words on a website?
On a website, yeah, exactly.
I mean, even WordPress says that.
Yeah,
it says publish, right?
Yeah, we'll document our journey.
I was like, no, you guys, you started a blog. And what I learned is like, oh, people find value in a blog. People find value in books. People find value in public speaking or in tour stops. Eventually, we started a podcast to promote our first film. The opposite ended up happening. Our film ended up promoting our podcast. Because as soon as it hit Netflix, all of a sudden, more and more people came in to this thing called minimalism, and so they found our podcast. And then the podcast then lent itself to the books, and the books pointed people toward the blog, and the blog pointed people toward the tour stops. And it became this self-fulfilling ecosystem, self-fueling ecosystem, that if I was really married to one communication tool, it wouldn't have worked. And so Ryan and I, we became vehicle agnostic over time. What is adding value to people's lives? If it's a film, great. If it's a YouTube video, great. If it's a tweet, great. I'm not married to any of them.
What I'm hearing from that, which is something I've sort of had to painstakingly discover for myself, is what you're trying to do in the world was somewhat emergent. It kind of emerged bottom up. It wasn't predetermined according to some plan.
That's right.
It wasn't some checklist you were following. You almost discovered it as you were going along, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. Like, I couldn't imagine if, like, I went to Josh and I'm like, all right, man, we're going to do 4 books. We're going to do two documentaries. We're going to start a podcast. We're going to do a 100-city tour. Like, it probably never would have happened if it started like that. Yeah, it was very much in reaction to what we felt like people needed at the time.
It especially wouldn't have happened because on that list would have been 17 other things we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And we'd feel like total failures now.
Yeah.
Can you believe our documentary didn't make it onto Disney Plus or whatever, right? It only made it onto Netflix. Well, the truth is Netflix turned us down twice on that first film. We finished it. It was great. We were really happy with it. We had 9 different versions. The 9th version was it. We did a huge screening in Fargo, North Dakota, of all places. Long story. And we were ready to, all right, let's get this out in the world. We go to Netflix, who was the only streamer back in 2015 when we first approached them. Yeah. The only streamer worth mentioning, really. There was CISO, I think. And we went to them, and they're like, nah, this doesn't really fit anything we're doing. We're like, okay, well, we've already done everything on our own anyway, so we don't need any gatekeeper's permission. Let's put it out on our own. You know what? Let's put it out in theaters, which is a crazy idea. I don't recommend that to anyone. Yeah. We figured out how to do it. 400 theaters, U.S., Canada, Australia. It was the #1 indie doc in 2016 in theaters, which sounds really impressive till you realize, like, when's the last time I saw a documentary in a theater? Almost never, right?
Yeah.
But it did well enough in theaters that we made our money back. We didn't lose money on the film. We broke even. And then we went back to Netflix and said, look how great this did in theaters. Do you want it? And they're like, no, we said we don't want it. And we're like, oh, okay, well, we'll just put it on our own. And so we put it out, transactional video, and it was on iTunes and Amazon and Google Play and Vimeo. And it did really well, especially on iTunes. So much so that it was their #1 film for a while. Not just #1 documentary, but #1 film because we sent enough people there. And then Netflix came back to us and said, hey, you know that film you guys made?
Yeah.
Can we get the streaming rights to it?
Yeah.
And we were like, okay, sure. And we had no idea what it would do, but it brought it in, and they didn't pay us a whole lot of money at all, but it brought it into a bunch of people's homes, and all of a sudden it turned this little spark into a conflagration. It would have been a failure, however, if that outcome was the outcome we needed in order to be satisfied by creating. It's never been about the pursuit of happiness with us. It's about the happiness of pursuit.
Yeah. What's so fascinating about this is I'm sort of, I'd say, like on the periphery of the minimalist community. I've been aware of it. I watched the documentary. It was one of those streams back in probably 2016.
Yeah.
But from sort of the outside looking in, The Minimalists is one of the most consistent, coherent, unified brands that exists. So I think you would assume from the outside looking in, they must have laid this out every single step along the way. For people who are taking on big endeavors, they're trying to do big projects, really make something happen in the world. How do you balance those two things with, you know, a purposeful direction that plays out over many years while having fun and being playful and letting it be emergent along the way? How do those two things relate?
I think it starts with getting clear on what you want to create. And for us, it was a story that we wanted to tell. So it was quality creation first. And Josh, interrupt me if I'm off base anywhere here. But like I remember with our first book, it was about getting quality words on the page, coming up with something we were happy about. And then when it was time to publish, like Josh is literally going to Barnes and Nobles and measuring margins in books. and he's like paying attention to that detail. And, you know, and that, just to get the idea of the aesthetic quality that we wanted to put out. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think aesthetics are definitely important. And
Sure.
I think that's where you talk about the brand side of things. It's getting obsessive about the details because both God and the devil are in the details. The devil's in the lack of the details, basically. But I think that's where we often go wrong is we don't pay attention to the details. Or the flip side of that is you get so caught up in aesthetics, there's no substance there, right? When you see something that looks really beautiful, it's like the metaphor I think of right away is like you can have a really beautiful home with a beautiful facade, but if the wood inside is rotting and being eaten by termites, it's still not the home that you want to live in, right? The opposite is also true. If you buy a home that's real structurally sound but is ugly and it makes you feel miserable every time you walk into it and you're just like, oh, I don't like being here, the energy in this place, well, that's a problem too. What happens when you marry the two and then also you get rid of the imaginary values. We have this, we often talk about our values, but we have this values worksheet on our website, which people can download for free. It's about understanding what you value. And there are 4 basic types of values. We have foundational values. So you're building a house. Every house has a foundation. I think everyone has similar foundational values. It's like health, relationships, community, creativity, passion. Similar. Now, they manifest differently. Like what I'm passionate about may be radically different from what TK is passionate about. That's fine. But it's the same foundational value. Beyond that, when you're building a house, you have structural values. So that's what makes your life interesting, right? Every house is different because of the structure is different. You got a wall here, and you have a retaining wall there, and I want a garage over there. And Ryan had a second living room at one point. However you want to build your house is fine, no judgment. But your house, if you're building it intentionally, you're building it around your life as opposed to trying to cram a life into someone else's structure. And that's what getting clear on your values does. The third value is your surface values. That's the coat of paint or the facade that you want. These are things that interest you, maybe hobbies that make life richer or more meaningful. Quite often we confuse those with the foundational values. Say, the thing that's most important to me is the color of paint on my walls. No, that's not the most important thing. It's not unimportant, but it is not as important as having a sturdy foundation. And finally, the fourth kind of value, imaginary values. It's sort of like putting a giant fence around your house without a door, and it actually prevents you from getting into the house. And that's what we always focus on, because your values aren't what you say they are. It's how you spend your 24 hours. And so I might say that writing is really important to me, but if I'm not writing every day, then is it actually a value of mine? Is it a priority of mine? Which, by the way, don't even get me started on priorities. That word didn't have a plural until the 20th century. And so we talk about our priorities. The United Nations released a list of their 163 priorities at one point. Priority means the first thing.
Yeah.
And so how can you have 163 the first things? It just doesn't even make sense. It's nonsense. And so what happens is we focus on these imaginary values that are protecting the house from us getting inside. And however I'm spending my day, that's what I actually value. If I'm scrolling TikTok for 45 minutes a day, or if I'm consuming digital content for 12 hours a day, that's not wrong, but it is your priority. If writing a book is your priority, you're actually writing the book. If your family is your priority in this moment, you're with your family. At this moment, my priority is having this conversation with you. I have no other priorities. It is that and only that. And the only way we get there is by eliminating all of those imaginary values.
I recently, in the past week, rewatched Less Is Now to kind of, do my homework and all that. And I was thinking back to why this message resonated so much with me. And I think it's because I had a model in my early life of, I don't know if my dad would call it minimalism. I think it'd be more anti-consumerism.
Yes.
He was such a great example of anti-consumerism. And when I look back on why was he such a good model, is he had something else to give him purpose, which was art. My dad is an artist, a painter. He paints. His trademark is these huge, like larger than life canvases of figures. Sometimes he does still lives, sometimes abstract.
Wow.
And so all growing up, we had a studio in the backyard, which was an old garage that he turned into an art studio. And I'd go back there and he would just be in there for hours and hours and hours, just like having the time of his life. And when I looked at what was the material that was needed for that, it was $30 in paint, a few canvases that cost $20 or $30 each. For $100, he could buy 100 hours of like the most potent joy and immersion. Yeah. And I could never after seeing that, especially as a young child, believe that, that money, that large amounts of money and large amounts of stuff was needed to create joy. And so I wonder for you all, how creativity plays into this. Is creativity an antidote to consumerism? Like, so another way of thinking of this is sometimes I think people think creativity, they think mess.
Yes.
Because all of our sort of preconceptions and many examples of creativity. Oh no, you need to have, if you're a journalist, just like papers everywhere. If you're an artist, like paint splatters. If you're a musician, like all these random instruments. I guess what I'm trying to ask is that kind of free-form, joyful creativity compatible with minimalism?
The antidote to consumerism is purpose. And when I think about why I used to consume things, in a weird way, it gave me a very short-term purpose, right? Like I want to get the latest gadget, right? So now I have it in my head. I'm going to get that thing. And then you go buy it and you have it and you feel good for a second and you've completed your goal. You've completed that purpose you laid out, but the joy doesn't last very long. But when your father is constantly creating and serving that purpose of his to create art, like that, to me, it makes sense as to why he was so anti-consumeristic.
I've never thought about it that way. It's true. A product it's like micro-dosing purpose.
Yeah.
You have the intention, I'm going to do that. And then you go to the store. All these things are there to support you in accomplishing your intention.
Yeah.
There's a nice little pathway, cash register. You have a little bag. And then you get to feel just a tiny little bit of what that feeling is.
Yeah.
To the question, hey, is that kind of creative messiness compatible with minimalism? The first thing I would say is, even if it is not, throw away the minimalism and hang on to the creativity.
Yes.
Because creativity is life.
Yeah.
And life is about the playful, authentic expression of creative energy. It's not about attaching yourself to a label and then reducing everything else you do to something that has to seek the permission of that label. That's no way to live. If there's anything that brings you joy that is worth saying yes to, don't ever let the label or the loyalty to a label like minimalism hold you back. Get rid of minimalism and go after your best life, right? Yeah. But I do think it's compatible because minimalism isn't so much about saying you can't have this many things or everything has to be in this place versus that place. It's about saying, what is the relationship to space that makes the most sense of my stuff and gives me the most healthy, constructive relationship to my stuff? Like David Allen, who you introduced me to in the GTD method, he talks about how organization is everything being in the place it needs to be in order to serve the purpose that it needs to serve. That's organization, nothing else. So you can't say it's organized if it's here versus here. You can only know if it's organized if it's in the place that it needs to be to serve the purpose that it needs to serve. And so that's relative to the individual and what they're trying to achieve. So if you walk into an artist's, space and you see a bunch of paint around and a bunch of paintbrushes and you say, oh, that's messy, for them, everything might be where it needs to be for them to joyfully do what they need to do.
Yes.
And so that's why we talk a lot about on the show about how clutter is subjective. What's clutter for me isn't clutter for you, because clutter is defined not by the number of stuff or where it's sitting, but by the function of getting in the way. If it gets in the way, it's clutter by definition. If it doesn't get in your way, then it's freedom, even if it's clutter for someone else.
That just reminds me of one more memory, which is, so my dad's studio was purposefully messy. My mom would go in and try to clean it. Be like, no. I need things to be like overlapping and sort of spilling onto each other. But then in his finances, he still is the most meticulous financial person. And when I ask him why, he says, I can't paint if I'm worried about money.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah. Here's the weird thing is we moralize everything. We mess, therefore bad, right? If someone says a curse word, or we say it's a dirty word, well, where do you grow all your food? You grow it in the dirt. The dirtiest place there is where all of life comes from. We moralize even the dirt. And so when people conflate minimalism with asceticism or with being sterile in some sense, like if you come to my house, it's true. I live much more ascetically than most people. I don't own much of anything personally. But I'm not saying that's what you should do or you should do or you should do. Ryan, we joke, he's the messy minimalist. He has 12 things and they're strewn all throughout his house.
I got my system.
But the thing is, it works well for him. He actually owns fewer things than I do. They're just in an order that would seem like chaos to me. And by the way, my order seems chaotic to Ryan because it seems constricting. And there's no freedom when you're that constricted. For me, it feels freeing. For someone else, it can be constricting or restrictive. And that's not what we want to communicate with minimalism. I wish I could give you a list and say, well, here are the 100 items you should own, the 12 apps you must have, and the 10 things you must do with your creativity, and now you'll live a purpose-driven, fulfilled life. But I could give you those things for me, and if you try to map that onto you, you'd be like, damn, this is miserable. Minimalism sucks.
Yeah, what I'm taking away from this is the that even with minimalism, and we talked about rules and policies and constraints and boundaries. We talked a lot about like structural things. That's probably also my influence. I tend to use a lot of engineering language. But you're basically creating an environment because you need a place to, within which to act. But that environment is one that invites your free form, spontaneous, joyful self-expression.
Yeah. The nail on the head earlier, TK, talking about how the structure is what makes the game. And if I was to like reframe that, it would be something like the structure we have in our lives will enhance our joy. Because if I just gave TK a basketball and that's it, I'm like, all right, let's play basketball. And like, we're, in the middle of a field. It's like, okay, like it's not very
kick it.
Right.
What do we do with this?
Yeah.
But as soon as you've established those rules, those boundaries, the tools in which to play, it reminds me of this. There's a Jordan Peterson parable. He said, all right, do you want to play the game of freedom? Here, I'll do it with Ryan. We'll demonstrate for you. Ryan, would you like to play the game of freedom?
Would love to.
All right, you go first.
All right, your turn.
The point is, if you have no boundaries whatsoever, there's no game to play at all. It only becomes a game when you have some of those boundaries set up for yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end. I want to thank the three of you. This has been, as I said when I walked in, an honor, a privilege. Count me as a member of the minimalist movement. I think
We'll give you a certificate on the way out.
yes, a pin, please. You've been a huge inspiration, and I honestly hope I can have some of the impact you've had in the physical world, in the digital world, which is just becoming so important. I think it seems like, based on what we talked about, many or most or all of this very same principles and attitudes apply. We're now spending not just half of our waking hours, but half of our hours in the digital world.
That's wild.
And it's actually kind of reassuring that we can carry over some of what we've learned about what it means to live a purposeful life in the so-called real world to the digital one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tiago, thank you so much, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Appreciate you, man.